Hey, Sarah Quillen, welcome to the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to finally be on here. This is like a dream come true.
Well, thanks. It's a dream for us to have you as well. ILADS is one of our favorite organizations, and we've interviewed so many of the people from ILADS. Some of the pioneers of ILADS are from Long Island, which is where Matt and I are from. So we're just really excited to have you and the ILADS organization. And more exciting than just having you, we also have Ali Moresco today, which is always an exciting moment for the folks in our community. So Ali, why don't you say hi to the folks?
Hello, thanks for letting me join today. I feel like I'm always talking about ILADS and I'm always talking about tick boot camps. This is really just like a true marriage for me,
Uh,
the
that
perfect
is
marriage.
that is so exciting. Unfortunately, a little less exciting is Matt Sabatello's with us today too. But I don't want to upset the folks when they were excited to know that Sarah and Ali were here. So we won't talk too much about Matt. He'll be interrupting soon. So Sarah, why don't you first talk to us about ILADS? I mean, we have a whole spectrum of folks who listen to this podcast. Some people who are new to the Lyme disease community, some folks who have been in the Lyme disease community for a long time. So for the folks who are new to the community, why don't you introduce ILADS to them?
Oh, I'm so happy to. So ILADS is the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. We are a nonprofit international multidisciplinary medical society dedicated to the diagnosis and treatment of Lyme and other complex inflammatory diseases. We are actually celebrating our 25th year, and our mission has never wavered from promoting awareness and understanding of those diseases through science, research, and education. And we are out on a mission to support all manner of healthcare professionals that are focused on tick-borne disease.
Cool. And what is your current title with ILADS and how long have you been with them?
I am the executive director of ILADS and our associated educational foundation, ILADF. And that is just a very fancy title for someone who is really trying to move the needle in the medical community, in the healthcare community, to bring awareness to this community that has been here for over 20 years.
Yeah, it sounds like to me like you're the big boss.
I'd like to think of that, but if you ask anybody in ILADS, that's not really how it works. And especially if you ask my husband, that is not how that works. But in my own world, yes, I am the big dog.
Well, I'm definitely not going to ask your husband because he'll definitely say you're the big boss. So let's so let's talk a little bit more about you. So one of the things that excited me about you is that you're a New Yorker, right? And I know folks on our podcast don't like to hear our accents, but other than speaking some language other than English, we in New York have a lot of contact with Lyme disease. So, we here on Long Island often think of ourselves as the New Yorkers who have the greatest contact with Lyme disease, but you actually grew up in another part of the state that has, a huge, and has for a long time had a huge problem with Lyme disease. So why don't you first share with us where you're from?
Sure. So I say you got to travel a little bit upstate away from Long Island to get to me. So I grew up, born and raised in Poughkeepsie. My family are all still there, still in the same house that I grew up in, on a lovely 5-acre rolling hill wooded area. Yes, it is the hotbed of ticks. And yes, I have been surrounded by them since since birth, and never thought anything really of it. They've been deer, and all of them have been all around us.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about your contact with ticks and your life with Lyme disease, right? I mean, I've had ticks, quite frankly, a part of my life, my entire life. I've shared with the listeners on our podcast that since my young childhood, and I am old, but since my young childhood, we had what we call the janky tick kit in our mudroom. Because we had so many ticks on our companion animals, our dogs, and on us when we were coming in, we always had to go into the side door in the mudroom, and we always had to be checked for ticks. And there was a vat of Vaseline, which we know we shouldn't have used, but we didn't know that then, with tweezers and matches, so that we can take ticks off of us. So I don't know if you had a similar experience, but that's how endemic ticks were to me in my childhood in the 60s and the 70s. What was it like for you?
So I'm going to roll right past the fact that you actually had a mudroom, because I don't think anybody outside of New York understands what a mudroom is. And that was the place where you got your snowmobile suit off and your galoshes, and yep, you had the jar of Vaseline right there. And as a child of the 70s, we did all the bad things that you weren't supposed to do. But yeah, so I have been around it my whole life. My experience, thankfully for me, has not been me, but it has not gone far. My father has been bit by ticks hundreds of times, and he's actually gone through probably about 5 or 6 bouts of Lyme disease. And I will say, kudos to quick identification, quick action on his part, and every time, most of the time, he recognized the symptoms. He recognized, like, well, I don't feel right. I think he had the rash maybe once or twice of those times, but for the most part, he had the other symptoms that you don't often identify with it, but was smart enough to go to the doctor, had a good doctor that was smart enough to test and treat, and actually, luckily, for most of those times, he was able to be treated by antibiotics for a good, and not just the 1 day or the 2 days of doxycycline. I mean, he had the doses of it. But I will say, the last time he didn't realize it. He didn't get tested right away. Symptoms got worse, and by the time, and he got misdiagnosed and went through, unfortunately, the sort of the typical story that a lot of other folks go through, and discovered he had Babesia, and then had to go through a long bit of treatment. And even years later, I still feel like he suffers the after effects of that, and not to mention the true paranoia now of still living in New York, still taking care of their property. I mean, my dad's in his 80s, and he's still chopping wood and, mowing the lawn and shoveling and doing all that, and is hyper aware of what could be out there now. So I fear that's sort of the challenge. But the other part, I know this is kind of cool. Two pieces that I'll add. In the 90s, my father was part of one of the early clinical tests for one of the vaccines. And he was one of the few that actually he didn't have the symptoms or side effects. It actually worked for him, and he was actually really disappointed when they pulled it off the clinical trials. So that was one. And then the other kind of cool story is my step grandfather was the golfing buddy of Willie Bergdorfer. So got to hear some of those stories from long ago. That's my one claim to fame that I get to have.
It just seems appropriate that the big boss at ILADS really should be a New Yorker who has had ticks, biting her and her family for her entire life, and bringing those experiences to the community, right? Because one of the things that I was thinking as you were talking about how your dad was smart enough and how his doctor was smart enough, was I was really just thinking he was lucky. And he was lucky that he was aware enough, because I think we don't have actionable awareness even in New York when we're living with ticks all over us, and we certainly don't have many competent doctors. My own doctor, who I adored until I got bitten by a tick a couple of years ago, and who was no longer my doctor, was clueless when it came to offering me treatment options for this disease. And now I look back at how incompetent she was now that I've become Lyme aware, and I'm just shocked. So I think your dad really had more good fortune, quite frankly, than anything else.
He had a lot of good luck, but he also he is his own health advocate, right? He understands what his body is capable of doing. He's in great shape, and recognizes, I don't feel quite right. Something's not right. And then if he doesn't accept the answer that his healthcare practitioner gives him, it's okay to get a second opinion. He understands that nothing may come of it, or I might get a different diagnosis. I don't know, but I won't know until I ask. And I think that's a big key, not just in our community, but all across the entire healthcare spectrum. We need to be our own health advocates, and we need to speak up when we don't want to accept particular non-answers.
Okay. So I'm excited to talk with you more about that issue, but let's now build you out a little bit so that our folks have a context for you. Talk to us about what your goals were during your childhood, where you ultimately went to achieve your formal education, and what type of work did you do after you graduated from college?
So I took a really interesting route that it'll come back around to it, but had nothing at all to do with the role that I sit in right now. Through my childhood up through high school, I was a musician. I played piano and I played trombone, and I had all intentions of sitting in an orchestra as a professional for the rest of my life. And nope, that didn't happen. I actually did. I got into college. I got into the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, as a music major, and lasted about 2 years in that, and loved it. Absolutely loved it. But saw all my friends who were also music majors not playing music and doing plenty of other things, and had the first of many heart-to-hearts with my professor, struggling with what am I going to do with my life. And he gave me the sort of /aha moment to go, well, you don't have to do that for a living. You can still play for fun and find another profession. I had no idea that I could do that, and immediately changed my trajectory and changed my route. And actually, Rich, you'll appreciate this. Then I was going to become a lawyer. I thought that was the role for me. Absolutely, I could do that. Ha. And that didn't last either. I finished my undergraduate with a political science degree, took the LSATs, got on waiting lists for law schools, and got really impatient. As you get to know me, you'll realize I'm a really impatient person, and that's probably my lifelong test that I always am working on, is just being patient with myself and all those that are around me. And so then, while I was waiting to get into law school, the head of the graduate department, still at UNC Greensboro, said, well, just take a grant writing class. It'll be no big deal. It'll be fun. It's a Saturday afternoon. And I never looked back from there. And so from there, I got my master's of public administration, which was sort of the precursor before nonprofit management became a thing. This is showing my age. I get to be old here too. Once they got those kind of degrees out, then I thought, oh, I want to go back to school to be able to get that degree. But no, that's not happening. But from there, I started working in nonprofits. I was working in a housing authority doing public housing grants, and then I had done work at a community foundation, and ended up from there really wanting to create a whole fundraising program in some kind of health and human services. At the time, I wasn't really sure what that was, and ended up moving to Florida, to Central Florida, and became the development director for a hospice there. And if you are familiar with hospice and palliative care, it's one of those things that people don't want to talk about. You're talking about end of life and death, and of course palliative care, which is pain management. And I loved every second of it. I loved the healthcare. I loved the team. I loved the fundraising. To this day, that has stayed with me, and I love talking with donors. And the question I love to ask them is, what inspires your gift? And from there comes fantastic stories. And I can go on all day of where that has taken me in my life, but that has stuck with me. And so I was in hospice for several years due to some changes in that organization. I ended up working for an SPCA, for an animal organization. And although I loved the work, I hated that organization, and can get into all that in terms of when you look at administration and how organizations are run and things like that. But I wanted to get back into health and human service. So I moved back up to Northern Virginia, which is where I am right now, right outside of DC, Washington, DC. And I worked for another community hospice. That role took me to the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, which is a member association. And so I was there for 10 years and wore many hats there, all in this interdisciplinary healthcare realm. And then from there went to Ronald McDonald House, and finally, through professional networks and such, landed at ILADS. But the theme throughout that you'll be able to see through this is
oh, I see it.
Right. I know it kind of hits you over the head, right? I mean, I clearly I have a joy and a passion, and I just love that being able to marry I can bring the skills and role in my profession to what I absolutely love to do, is being able to help people in their healthcare journey, wherever that healthcare journey may lead to.
Okay. So I want to talk about one of the things you shared with us about your personality, which is your lack of patience. And I want to let you know that excites me as someone who wants to speed up the process or compress the amount of time it's taking to get us to a higher level of care for people who have chronic Lyme disease. I think we've been patient too long. I think our community has been asked to be patient for too long, and I think not only as a kid who grew up in the Lyme Belt, the way you did, who watched her father have to deal with Lyme disease and ticks and those challenges that ticks are, and not only as someone who thought she was going to be a musician, but of course that's not what God's plan was for her. So she got bumped back onto the path that she was supposed to be on, and learned all of the educational materials and ultimately the experiences that she needed to be the big boss at ILADS. Talk to us about how your lack of patience is something that's going to serve us at ILADS.
So I think it actually already kind of has a little bit. I gently nudge, I'd like to say. I think some of the inner workings of the organization, this organization has been around for 25 years. This year we are celebrating 25 years. And so, me stepping in without whatever, history, I can easily just discount it and, okay, turn the page, acknowledge and move on. However, I take the tack of, I honor that history. I get that these clinicians have been in the trenches doing this work in the community, and getting called to the medical board carpet, losing their licenses, arguing with their colleagues, getting, just having all kinds of walls hit them throughout the years. And I don't want to let go of that, or I don't want to ignore that, but I want to be able to move past that. And I think that my kind of impatience is couched in being able to nudge that along, but still getting my agenda moving forward with this organization. So I will say there's a balance between my impatience and having to slow my roll. In terms of there's a lot more things in my head that I want to have gotten done, and I've been here now a year. I've been at ILADS for a year, and I have a long list of things. Several of them we are checking off, but I think the things that we have made some great changes and strides, I think go to my impatience.
Okay, so I want Ali and Matt to join us now so that we can now talk about a couple of topics. And
thank God.
The first topic I want to talk about, just so we need another New Yorker butting in. But at any rate, I think it's important for us to focus at this time about the difference between research science and clinical science, or research professionals and clinical professionals, and why ILADS is so vital to this process. Because you did touch upon the issue that is vital to this community, which is their doctors are not always capable of treating them the way their doctors have been trained to treat them. And doctors are often put in this position where they can either do what's in the best interest of their patient, which is what they take an oath to do, or put themselves in a position where they're not doing what's in the best interest of the patient, but doing what's in the best interest of themselves and their families, because they're going to lose their license, right? And that's all based on generally accepted medical practices, right? And what clinicians are permitted to do is, in order to stay safe, is only utilize generally accepted medical practices when they're treating their patients. And before ILADS, the generally accepted medical standards was generally driven by the research that was done by other organizations who shall remain nameless, and other academics who had a personal interest in promoting the research that had been done, and that had put many doctors in a position where they didn't have the support that they needed from the research community to do the work that they were doing. Now, of course, we do know that clinicians are legally permitted to look at the generally accepted medical practices, and then determine if somebody is an outlier, and if somebody's an outlier, to treat them differently. But when they take that risk, especially when you have the other organizations who are promoting other research, then coming and testifying against them, they find themselves in a difficult spot. So Sarah, talk to us about how it is vitally important to the patient community to have ILADS and the type of research that's being done by ILADS, so that clinicians have the freedom to treat their patients the way they need to treat their patients.
Oh, that is such a great question. And that, I think, is one of the most important components of where ILADS fits into this big puzzle, right? Because we have this fantastic cadre of members who run the gamut of the healthcare profession. And a lot of them wear multiple hats of clinician and researcher. Why? Because nobody else has done it. I have the patients sitting in front of me in my office with these complex folders full of data and pieces and testing. So if I can't find it anywhere else, I'm going to do it myself. And that's kind of where ILADS has started in terms of marrying that research and practicing clinician. And I'm kind of happy, and I'm glad to see there's more and more research out there now. There are more and more labs doing testing. There's more and more tests that are being created. And I think that's all due to research that folks just kind of like rolled their sleeves up, dug in, and, you know, whatever consequences come what may, let's just get these out there. I mean, there's having clinical trials done when they were done years ago. And I don't think there's been one done in 8 to 10 years or something. I think that's huge. And the fact that there's now more and more clinicians who are dipping their toe, and I would say are ILADS curious and reaching out to ILADS members to co-author publications and look into, well, maybe we can do some collaborative research. And hey, I had this very strange, test. What does that mean? Send that to so-and-so's an ILADS member. They know, they have it. So I do think it really is, it's crucial to have, and it all advances the standards of care. I mean, all of that, all the boat rises with the tide, all boats rise with the tide. That's really where ILADS comes in. And there's so many things happening. Like, I'm aware of a lot of the things happening, but even I find out on a daily basis, like, oh, you're doing this research. That's fantastic. Did you know that, so-and-so is also doing that? Let me make that connection. And you've now just made it twice as wonderful. So, and there's still more to be done. That's the big challenge. And the other part that I think ILADS is kind of fitting in is because we have all these clinicians who have all this data, let's figure out what we can do with it. And I know other groups have compiled data and been able to utilize it somewhat. And there's some fantastic research that's being funded through like Bay Area Foundation, the Cohen Foundation, and I still think that's the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more to be done. And so ILAD's contribution to that is we're looking at finding basically a big database of that we can put all this data into, and that clinicians and researchers can then pull it out as needed to be able to further those standards of care.
Sarah, I want to jump in because I feel like we've made a lot of progress since I first got sick in 2014. Almost 10 years ago, believe it or not, on Long Island, nobody thought Lyme after seeing dozens of doctors. And I think we've come a long way, but it's still not where we need to be. And you talked about more research studies, but we have on our website, you have published on your site over 700 peer-reviewed scientific articles proving Lyme persists. Chronic Lyme is real. We've echoed that. We have it on our website. We share it out all the time to people in the community. But that message has not made it to mainstream doctors here on Long Island where Lyme is so prevalent. Never mind more rural areas where Lyme is not as prevalent. So putting your marketing hat on and your fundraising hat, and you too, Ali, I'm curious to see what you both think is needed to make this be more mainstream, because 700 plus peer-reviewed articles, millions of people suffering from chronic Lyme, and yet it's still not mainstream. So, like, what are your thoughts for the future of ILADS and how you're going to change that and let this be more commonly known across the country and across the world?
Boy, that is the nut to crack, isn't it? I mean, that you just hit it right on the head, Matt. That's what we're trying to figure out. How do we? It's mainstream to us. This community is not a niche community. I mean, even take the word Lyme out of it. Look at all the symptomology that goes with it. It's not this niche. And so how do we reach? And I throw that out to all of your listeners. I think that's the army that is out there that has the voice. I mean, you guys have probably a stronger voice together than all of ILADS members put together. And maybe that's the key to it, right? Just the patient, the patient army, that it has this wonderful community talking loudly and repeating loudly about the care that they get and the studies that are out there and the research that's out there. I mean, I look to Ali too for those kind of answers, and this is what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, what do you think, Ali? I mean, from that standpoint, it still blows my mind that we have millions of people suffering in the US alone and all those peer-reviewed scientific journals, but yet it's not mainstream.
So I will say, and I might like rant for a minute, Italian rant. What I've been thinking since Rich and Sarah started talking about the research aspect of ILADS and just the caliber of research that ILADS is able to put out, I think when you look at us compared to really any other, or when you look at ILADS compared to really any other organization, where else can you find, like in one room or on one Zoom, or however ILADS does their board meetings and member meetings, like there's no other group where you can find the Amy Offits and the Casey Kellys and the Omar Moraleses and the Chris Pucketts and Rich Horowitz, and there is no other room like that. And to have all of these clinicians and researchers together putting their brains together and saying, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I think the biggest issue is, this is what we need to address, number one. And then number two, taking that into the conference in both the US and Europe to spread that knowledge is really incredible. Like, I had the opportunity to go to the ILADS conference in Boston for the first time this past year, and it was kind of just mind-blowing to see all of these doctors presenting either their cases or their research or their treatment protocols, for things like Lyme, autism, cancer, pandas, like you name it, there was an authority on it. And then to see all of these other doctors of the same caliber, like hundreds of them, taking notes on it and discussing the cases, like you just don't see anything like it anywhere else. So number one, I do think that the change is happening. I think some of it is not always visible to us, and it's not always visible to the patient community. I think the second piece of this, and I think in particular in relation to ILADS, where we really see change happening in the medical community, is like, not only do you have these clinicians and these researchers publishing their research, sharing with each other, conversing with each other, but then ILADS puts out, educational courses. So any clinician, any medical professional can take these, medical courses, for lack of a better term, and become educated. We've educated thousands on vector-borne disease fundamentals, which is really critical, I think, in, for lack of a better term, disseminating the information through these medical communities. You know, that's what we need. I think it's, although I know Sarah is impatient, I'm impatient. I think all four of us on this call are impatient. Since I got sick 8 years ago, you know, the incremental changes over time, I think, have really add up. And it kind of like related to Lyme. And like when you're in the thick of it, you don't notice all of the little improvements that are happening in your body that add up into this big thing. And like when I look at the past 8 years and like, you know, the KHA and Tick Act and the funding and the new CDC guides that have come out, and like they might not be perfect, but I'm like, we're making headway, you know, we're getting somewhere. That's my rant of the
So
night.
Matt, I want to add to this part of the conversation, because Sarah, I think, did call out to empower patients, right? But it's not just the patient community that has a responsibility here; it's the rest of us as well, right? There are too many people who have family members and loved ones who have Lyme disease who are not stepping up and doing enough work, right? And so in addition to the patient community having to step up, so does the family and friends and communities of people who have people with Lyme disease. And again, I guess one of the sad side effects of this this endemic disease is that at least where we live, it's hard to find a family that hasn't been touched by Lyme, right? And I guess one of the positive elements of that is it's very much like the gay rights movement, where there wasn't a family that didn't have a gay member of their family. So then when it was time to first, you know, when it was time to finally recognize that, the gay rights movement moved very, very quickly, because everybody had to step up, right? And we're to the point now where every family is going to have someone with Lyme disease, and everyone is going to have to step up and make sure that we demand a higher quality of care for everybody in this community. So the bad news is everybody's getting sick. The good news is it is going to, I think, speed up the pace and maybe make some of us impatient people excited about the changes that are going to be coming.
But let me build on that and ask Sarah how we can expedite that process a little bit. I know we have to be a little patient here, Sarah, but I was at a birthday party 2 weeks ago. One of my good friends' sons was having his son's first birthday. His brother was there, and we grew up together. So we were having a chat, and he was sharing with me how his best friend was suffering from tick-borne illness. And when he was sharing with me at the party, so now we're out in the open, people everywhere, and he leans in and he whispers to me, "Oh yeah, my best friend is suffering from tick-borne illness like you did," you know, almost like he was ashamed and he had to mute his voice, right? So how do we encourage people who are friends and family members of people suffering from tick-borne illness to not look at it like there's a stigma, and not where you have to lower your voice so people don't hear you when you're talking about it? Because I want to yell it from the mountaintop. So how do we convince the average person that there's not a taboo here, that this is something that is, you know, accepted, it's scientifically proven? What's your advice in that situation that I could have given him to be more vocal about it?
Well, I was going to say in the, you know, I'm not a shy person either. So people do the same thing to me, like, "Oh, Lyme disease."
Yeah.
You don't have to whisper it. Like, they know they have Lyme. It's talk about it. Talk about it out loud. Talk about it multiple times. I mean, it's the simple act of just repeating it. I mean, what is it? Repetition is the key to adult learning, right? We need to hear things over and over again so that it becomes the norm. And I think that's where it's actually moving to. I don't think it's, I mean, it's clearly, just to Ali's point, it's clearly made progress from where it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. I mean, if you look at the number of folks that have gone through ILADS education, there's thousands of them. I mean, the vector-borne illness fundamentals that have gone through our program, over thousands. Only half of them, I think, have been ILADS members. That tells me that's huge. That means there are other folks who are curious enough who want to learn. And then on top of that, there are people who come to fundamentals more than once. So not only are they curious to learn, they want to keep learning. So keep talking about it. You know, it's always interesting. This brings me back to my my hospice days, because that's where hospice was too. Like, everybody would whisper, you know. No, we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it out loud. We need to repeat it. We need to understand it and not be ashamed of it. And this is where, you know, you're growing up with like Sesame Street kind of thing. It starts with you. Just talk about it. Don't be ashamed about it. Let's keep that conversation going. And actually, so the other point that Ali was talking about, what I found interesting in the ILADS Scientific Conference in Boston, and I hope we get to do it again in 2024, we'll be in San Antonio. I think over half of the attendees of that conference were first-time attendees of ILADS and or not ILADS members, meaning that's how I think we expand our reach. I'm fiercely protective of the ILADS members. Obviously, that is my priority. We want to make sure we are caring and feeding for them, you know, in all manner, and that we are making sure that they are providing the best care to their patients. But as important, the ones that aren't ILADS members, if you have made the investment of time, money, energy away from your office to come to ILADS education, to be part of, to ask questions, then that's how we expand this community. That's how we expand that communication, that ability to have those conversations, and doing it from Capitol Hill, doing it from, you know, the folks who are doing the advocacy and lobbying. That's phenomenal. The ones who are doing it in these wonderful support groups on Facebook in different states and regions, keep talking about that. You know, again, here's where I put my hospice hat on. You've got one person who actually was bit by the tick. You've got an entire family, entire care unit of folks who are also affected, sometimes just as much, because they have to sit by the wayside helpless. And that is just as hard, not to take away from the obviously the person who's suffering through it, but this is where everybody's involved. So say with one family, so my family, you know, it's myself, my brother, my mother and father. Say there's 4 people right there. One of them was bitten by the tick and had to go through treatment. There were 3 else of us who were having that conversation with other people, like, oh my God, my dad got bit by a tick. Again, I can't believe it. Multiply that out. And if people just keep talking, keep repeating it, then it becomes the norm, and it is no longer something whispered behind closed doors, and it becomes mainstream.
Well, the fact that you have that much turnout at your educational events, where half of them were non-ILADS doctors, that's really promising. Honestly, when you said those 2 statements, and the second one being that at your event this few months ago, that half of the attendees were newcomers, that's showing that there's a whole new group of people coming into this community to learn and to absorb and to share. So, I mean, that in itself is extremely promising. But I think one of the hard parts here, Sarah, is when most treatment for chronic Lyme, you know, not acute Lyme, not I was bit by a tick and I have a bullseye rash and I'm a healthy person and I want some acute doxycycline, but the people that are chronically ill, most states do not allow the treatment that is required for those individuals. So a good friend of Ali's and ours is Jenny Bottaccio from the Illinois Lyme Association, and they advocated for the state government to make a change to insulate and protect doctors from treating and giving people what is needed for their particular use case, right? How sick are they? What co-infections do they have? So they have immunity from treating Lyme. But here in New York, a lot of doctors are still afraid to treat properly because there are eyes on them. And I can tell you, my doctor just this past summer, I was bit by a tick. He wanted to give me prophylactic doxy, and he said, hey, look, I can only give you, I forget what it was, but he ended up doing double the dose because of, you know, justifying it that I needed more. I had to take double the dose, not to extend it for double the duration, to kind of skirt the system a little bit, right? So how do we overcome that barrier? Because to do that at a state-by-state level is a very difficult task. So, you know, what are your thoughts on that piece?
So that's, I think, also a good part of where ILADS can fit into that community. So we'll use your example, Matt. So a New York-based doctor who may be nervous about, like, oh, I don't know what to do. This is where ILADS can help. Like, well, let me put you in touch with the myriad other ILADS members based in New York serving this community, and let's network and let's help each other on how do you get past that barrier? Because a lot of times, sometimes it's just plain fear. out of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance like in a bad way. I mean, they just don't know the nuances that these ILADS members have gone through and understand and know how to give the best care for the patient within, you know, the confines of the system to be able to help. So that, I think, is always the first mode of, if you don't have an ILADS doctor, at least have your primary care practitioner talk to an ILADS member, and even just get the lay of the land on well, what's allowable, what's not, what are different modes of treatment. And truly, in every state, you know, despite the state challenges or the regulations that they have to follow, there's a whole menu of care that can occur that helps that patient. And you don't know, you know, I mean, you know this, right? That you've treated one patient, you've treated one patient. There's no across the board standard of care with this. Like, you do 1, 2, 3, and boom, go and prosper. What may work with one patient may not work with another patient. And again, this is where I feel like ILADS has a wonderful niche of being able to network, and it's true. This is truly actually a member benefit that I love sitting by the wayside. As the non-clinician, I get to sit and on the wings and listen to these conversations happen. Like, all right, here's what the patient's presenting with. Boom, 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 boom. I've tried boom, boom, boom. It doesn't work. What do we do? And then this wonderful discussion around basically like an informal case presentation. They get to then help, and it does equal the best care for that patient. Then they go through all the different nuances, or what's allowed in the state, or what can this particular type of practitioner, what are they allowed to do, not allowed to do? Because, as you know, every state has different rules and regulations for what maybe a naturopath can do versus what a nurse practitioner can do. And all those nuances are really where I think ILADS can shine. And we've been doing it for years. We've just been doing it quietly. So this is coming back to, you know, putting my marketing hat back on. Here's where I get to talk loudly about, look, ILADS has been here for years doing this. It's not new. It's not sexy. We've been doing it. Glad that people are finally starting to pay attention to it, but we have the keys. We have all the components that will be able to help these patients, and understanding that education is sort of the pivotal role to be able to turn the tides for ILADS members who've been members for years, or that new person who has a practice and has their first patient that they just can't explain what those symptoms are. All of those are, I think, where the niche that ILADS can really help. So that, to come back, long circuitous route to answer your question, I think it's talking to each other. ILADS members need to talk with other clinicians.
But sorry, Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, we should really talk about, bring this back to the patient experience, right? I mean, we certainly don't want to discourage any patient who wants to keep their experience private, or a family member who wants to honor a patient's desire to have a confidential experience while in their healthcare journey, to do anything other than that. But one of the things that we can do as patients is, if we talk more about this experience, it makes it safer for the medical practitioners to practice in the way that we want them to practice. What I mean by that is, when we're only talking about this in the shadows, when there's some stigma attached to this disease, then it's going to make practitioners less likely to treat this the way they've been trained to treat it. Even if they don't have the benefit of an ILADS contact and ILADS training, doctors generally have, in my view, the tools they need to treat this disease, but they're afraid to do it, right? When we ultimately have enough people talking about this, and once it's generally accepted and generally understood, and the taboo is erased, then doctors are more likely to treat it. And I'm hoping that they're more likely to seek out the kind of training and the kind of support they could get from ILADS. But it is really important to encourage patients and patient families to talk about this, so that their doctors have the protection they need to treat them appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. That is key. I mean, Rich, you said it. I mean, it all comes down to what the patient is comfortable. I mean, we all go to our healthcare professionals, and we don't want to go with the idea that I'm going to argue with them. You want to trust what they're telling you. But at the same sense, I always take everything with a little grain of salt. Maybe I'm, just I always want to dig deeper. You want to research things, you want to look into it. And actually, I think coming back to that patient community, I feel like you guys are, and I don't mean like you guys, I mean all the patient community out there, you've had to research and you've had to look into whatever symptoms you've had, because maybe nobody else around you knew had that, or your doctor didn't, or your medical professional didn't. So you've already got this wonderful community that's already not afraid to research. So you can still obviously keep things confidential and private and quiet, but still just dig deeper. And I always say, I mean, to find an ILADS practitioner is probably the easiest thing. It's just go to ilads.org and hit provider. That's it. And then you can search geographically. You can search, if you want to look at a specific diagnosis, it's there for everybody, the public, to use. You can always give us a call. We will always be able to share lists of ILADS members. I mean, it's a resource there for you to be able to help you in that journey.
Yeah, I feel like so much of this with the patient experience you and Richard was talking about is there is that emotional trauma and physical trauma component of this disease. And as patients, we need to be at a point where we're emotionally and physically healthy enough to advocate, because unfortunately, a lot of stress and a lot of kickback can come to be an advocate. And we see it on Tick Bootcamp, which is why anybody who listens to this podcast knows Rich deals with all the hate, all the negativity, all the emotionally unhealthy people that attack us. Rich deals with, because frankly, it would impact my health, and I don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with that. So Rich deals with all of that piece of it. So that's very much true. And I think the same is true for some of these doctors, because, back to our conversation, Sarah, these doctors know what to do to treat, but they have that, they're trigger shy, for lack of a better word. And, don't forget, right here on Long Island, back, a couple of decades ago, we had Dr. Joseph Burascano, ILADS member, who almost lost his license, had to spend over $1 million in legal filings and legal lawsuits, and he had to have all his patients donate money to his cause, and he still nearly lost his license and barely kept it, right? So that information is still very much alive here on Long Island, and people know what happened to Dr. Burascano, and they don't want it to happen to them. They spent a fortune getting their medical license, and now to put it at risk for a patient, that's the hard part. And I think the answer to that, and you said it so well, is reach into the community of ILADS. This is a global community, and you will have support, you will have backup, you will have a family to give you what you need to help your patients, which is why you got into medicine to begin with. And you can do the right thing, you can help your patient and also protect yourself at the same time. And that's the message we need to get to our doctors as patients, is to tell our doctors, hey, if you're not ILADS friendly, or if you're not Lyme literate, go check out ILADS, give them a call. There are other medical professionals who will talk to you, mentor you, and help you become Lyme literate, because people desperately need your help. And there aren't enough ILADS doctors out there, in my opinion, because there aren't enough here on Long Island. And we get asked that all the time. Hey, I'm from Long Island. What doctor would you recommend that takes insurance? And there are none. I can't recommend any ILADS doctor here in New York, as well as Long Island specifically, that will take insurance and be able to help somebody. So I think that's really the best bet, is find your regular doctor who's willing to work with you and refer them to ILADS to learn and grow, and use you as a tool to learn and advance their career there. So that was really helpful, Sarah. Now, I do want to ask you, because a lot of your ILADS doctors, like we've had Bob Miller on, who presented at ILADS, and he's very much, on the genetic side of things. So he has his niche. He's the genetics guy. We've had, Dr. Marty Ross on, and he's ILAD friendly, and he's more, he kind of leads more natural. We had Dr. Cameron on. We've had a lot of these doctors, like even Leo Shea, he focuses more on mental health. But you have this interdisciplinary approach to treating Lyme disease, not treating as in actually treating patients, but approaching the problem. So how do you think that background that you have from working in, not-for-profits and working in hospice care and working in the animal cruelty world, all of that makes you better prepared to lead the ILADS community with a team of specialists that are niche-based specialists?
That I definitely think my background mostly in hospice and palliative care is really what served me well in this role, because look at the hospice team, right? And it's always a team of people that are caring for the patient and their circle of care, and whether that is their direct family, the family they choose, it kind of runs the gamut. And I take that approach to any kind of healthcare. I always feel like there's got to be a comprehensiveness to whatever care you are getting. And I think this community is no different, because you've got a team of folks. So maybe you have a medical doctor as the primary person that's leading that patient's care, but then they're having a terrible reaction from the allopathic approach to it. So then you move more towards a naturopathic approach, and maybe you're realizing that there's some more supplements and some other more natural things that will help. Well, then your biome is kind of all out of whack on that because of all that. So then you move to maybe an osteopath to be able to help. And then all the while, on a more frequent basis, you are seen by a nurse practitioner who also helps with some of the other components of that. And it can run from nutrition to physical therapy to psychological assistance on that. Right there, there's that circle of care to help just one patient and their family. And I take that approach to all of the work that ILADS does. And this is where really in the education, that's where it comes to fruition. And that's why I'm really proud that the members that represent ILADS run the spectrum of care, from that MD, DO, ND. You play the alphabet game here on all of them. And understanding, I think that this is the cool thing of it is, because they work together so well, maybe an MD will realize, all right, this plan of care is not working for this one particular patient. Let me reach out to my friend and colleague who, takes a different approach to it. And so their ultimate goal is the best care for that patient. And it may take, it's going to take a long time, obviously, to get through all the different symptoms and treating each symptom to be able to get rise up on the care for that patient. But it brings this full spectrum of care and feeding that I really think ILADS represents. And so my coming to that, I shouted that loud. I from day one, that we need to make sure we are educating, we are representing, and we are taking care of all those levels of the healthcare practitioner, from the MD all the way through to the PA and the RN and then some, because that is how we're going to reach more patients. That's how we're going to reach more practitioners, by being inclusive and by being by being interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, however you want to phrase it. So yeah, I feel very strongly about that for not even just in our communities. I think all healthcare should use that as the model of care.
Matt, one of the things that we've talked about on this podcast on a number of occasions is the patterns that we observe for people who are having success with this disease. And quite frankly, Sarah, what we find is that one of the patterns that we've observed, and we're going to be actually teaching this on our soon-to-be released YouTube channel, is that multiple disciplinary approach. It's never one bug, it's never one treatment, and it's never one doctor, right? I mean, we are complex beings, and if we don't build a team, we're not going to be successful, right? You need to treat the patient on a spiritual level. You need to treat the patient on a physiological level. You need to treat the patient on an emotional level. And in many cases, we've argued that if you're not prepared to work with a medical doctor, you're not prepared to work with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, you're not prepared to work with an herbalist, you're not prepared to work with within some spiritual community, you're going to really have challenges with the disease. And like Matt, one of the things that I was excited about when I discovered that you came from the palliative care community is that you have the perfect model for that. And I recently had two experiences in my life where my dad passed away and my mother-in-law passed away. And in both cases, we had beautiful experiences as a family, despite it being a really challenging time for us, because we had a team of people who were working not only to make sure that our family member was not in pain, but they also put us in a position where we had what we needed while we were going on that journey. And we need to make sure we bring that model to the Lyme disease community. So I love that you came from that background, and I love that you're the big cheese over there at ILADS now, because it's really important that ILADS builds, a model that cares for everyone, both upstream and downstream. And one of the other observations I want to make very quickly is, when we're interviewing ILADS doctors, we see that many of them are building their practices in that model where they have a diversity of practitioners. For example, one of the people we love is Casey Kelly. Dr. Kelly is a brilliant doctor, but if you look at her practice, it's a very diverse practice where she has a lot of the needs of a patient taken care of sort of at a one stop. You don't have this sort of sole practitioner who's only a medical doctor. You have a much more diverse set of practitioners working together. So I love that seems to be bleeding into the practitioners who are ILADS practitioners, and I think it's wonderful that God has prepared you for this position so well, Sarah.
If you believe there's a reason for it, this was it. And I want to come back. So one of the things that we'll keep repeating from ILADS, last year, the ILADS board, the leadership came together in a retreat and very strategically, very systematically changed our mission statement to include chronic inflammatory illness, because that widens the scope. And we all know there's Lyme and associated diseases. We all know that there's co-infections, all these different things that go, but this complex, and I always think that's the term, that's the key right there. Inflammatory illness, yes, very important. Complex, because that opens the door to bring in a whole spectrum of care. And Dr. Kelly is a great example of that practice, where you've got all the different levels of healthcare that will be able to help each patient at their level.
So that's an exciting, I guess, trigger for another question I wanted to ask you. I think one of the challenges that we have with Lyme disease, and we've had this debate over and over again with many practitioners, for example, Dr. McDonald argued that we should be divorced from the term Lyme, right? And Matt and I had a pretty rigorous debate with Dr. McDonald, who we love to death. But one of the challenges that we have in this community is that in many cases, people believe it's a disease without a definition, right? So one of the things that Matt and I had said, again, in the spirit of these patterns that we're observing and these frameworks we're building and these formulas we're trying to create, is we decided we were going to take control of the term Lyme disease. We were going to give it a definition, right? So we came up with this definition of Lyme disease as a polymicrobial, multisystemic, chronic infectious disease. And I said, Matt, we've now taken control of this definition, and we're going to make sure we spread it out there. And then I went to the ILADS page and I said, wow, I guess we didn't create that definition, because it's really been already, in much more detail, but that seems to be the way that you folks are defining Lyme disease. And I think that's exciting, right? Because, well, one of the things that has had me concerned is there almost seemed to be as many definitions of Lyme disease as there were practitioners that we were interviewing. And you folks seem to have now narrowed that to a place where we really have a good definition, right? We here at Tick Bootcamp do not define acute Lyme as Lyme disease. Right. If you're not chronically ill, you don't have Lyme disease. We don't define this one bacteria as a causation of Lyme disease, and we don't think the presentation of if it's not multisystemic, you don't have Lyme disease, right? So now we're capturing the essence of this, and now it makes it much harder for the Lyme deniers to deny that this disease exists, not just because of the research that ILADS is doing and the research that you're capturing, or the experiences that you're capturing, but even down to the basic level of defining the disease.
Yeah, welcome to the ILADS family, Rich. Thank you. Well, and one of those, to that end, at our 2024 annual scientific conference that we're going to have in San Antonio in November, the actual title of the conference we are naming Redefining Lyme Disease, the fusion of science and practice. but it's that redefining Lyme disease for just that exact thing. I think Lyme disease, and it's wonderful to be privy to all these internal conversations with the clinicians within ILADS, because they've been having this conversation for so long that the term Lyme disease has become this catch-all. And it's almost become like a 4-letter word kind of thing of, can we get past the term into a better definition of it? And again, this is me, non-clinician speaking, it almost sounds like Lyme disease is a symptom of the larger complex inflammatory disease. It becomes one component of this myriad list of other things that are endemic to what every patient suffers. So you've nailed it in the defining Lyme disease. But maybe we get beyond that. Don't lose sight of our our heritage and our beginnings and how this is how we got on the map. But we now know from research, from education, from years of experience, it's so much more than that. And so how do we encompass that? And I think that's this redefining Lyme disease is kind of where it's at, where we need to go.
So I'm going to jump in about another patient question here, because most people listening to this podcast are either suffering from Lyme, recently diagnosed, been suffering for quite a while, or at the latter stage of their healing journey, or a friend or family member of somebody who's suffering. And as a patient, we've had to learn a lot of hacks to save money and really, utilize our resources carefully. So one of the things that I do is I go to doctors, I take my insurance that are local, and I try to find somebody who's more open-minded and leverage them to run tests to better understand my body, and somebody who's willing to work with me. And unfortunately, they're not ILADS doctors and they're not Lyme literate, but they're open enough to be able to work with me to help me learn things about my body to help. So next Friday, I have an appointment with a rheumatologist that I see twice a year to just do blood work, a ton of blood work about all kinds of inflammatory markers. Now, knowing that, again, ILADS calls it this chronic inflammatory disease, right? And we know that inflammation is a huge part of the Lyme experience. What advice would you give somebody like myself for next Friday when I walk into that doctor to educate him or her about ILADS and how they can leverage your resources to better learn and serve patients like myself? Because I want to try it. So I want to see what you have to say, Sarah, and I want to walk in there on Friday and try to sell him on going to your website and making a call or submitting a web form and attending one of your webinars or talking to one of your doctors. So what's the best way I can try to do that next week?
Well, the first question I would ask is, are you familiar with ILADS? Ask that practitioner. And I've done that. I did that even to my father's doctor. And I got a very much like, yes, I am. And I am a member. And I love that. I was like, lecture me. That's great. Bring it. Good. But that's always the first question. Like, so what do you know about ILADS? And I'd be curious to see what kind of response they get, especially as a rheumatologist. They may very well know ILADS, have colleagues that are ILADS members. So I would send them to the homepage, because you'll be able to actually get just some basic information of who we are as an organization, who we represent in the medical community, and then some of the basic education. I would send them to the education tab on our website, because then you're able to get our conferences, our webinars. We have a beautiful, robust library full of education from that runs the spectrum to just general, like identifying ticks, identifying the hundreds of diseases that ticks can carry and that are all over the world, all the way through to, our vector-borne illness fundamentals is online. You can download that. Our conference, we record every one of our conference sessions on specific information on research. They can really go down a fun rabbit hole of education on that. But then also on the flip side, there's some basic information on the website of FAQs, just like what you guys have on your site of, what do I do if I get bit by a tick? What's the first step? Or what are the labs that are out there? Like you mentioned, saving the tick, don't throw away the tick. What do I do with it? Why would I want to keep that? It goes into basic information, and it whets the appetite enough to get them to take an action. And hopefully the action is to download education, attend our conference, and ultimately join. The other thing that I would say, again, coming back to, I would hope that they'd be curious enough to talk to an ILADS member. You know, you mentioned Joe Bershkano. I'm not gonna, you know, volunteer him, but he's always willing to talk to people. I mean, it's just wonderful that, especially someone like him who's gone, you know, who's been in the trenches for so long, still has that excitement, still wants to bring new people into this community. I mean, and that I think is telling in itself. But those are the easy, basic things that I would be able to say. But so Matt, you and Ali, I mean, all of you guys who dealt with this firsthand, you've been sitting on the patient side in a doctor's office. What would you say to them now that you know, and now that you've come onto the other side and you have this education and you have this wonderful platform of the Tick Boot Camp? What would you say to that physician who may not know?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? The first time I saw this doctor, because I frankly did not want to see a rheumatologist, and my neurologist, whom I respect, kept pushing me to see an open-minded rheumatologist who would better be able to get me, you know, advanced tests and specialized tests, just look at inflammatory markers and use all that information. So I finally conceded, went to see this doctor, and I decided I'm going to go in and I'm going to control the appointment because I have nothing to lose, right? I'm going to go in, I'm going to tell him, you know, what I'm looking for, what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do. And that approach worked pretty well for me. But the hard part is I was in a much healthier place to be able to do that, where I didn't need immediate help, right? So admittedly, to a lot of our listeners, if you're not in a healthier place, this may not be the best approach. But I went in with the sort of, I don't care if you don't want to listen to me because I'm just going to walk out and I don't need you, right? But it was very effective, and this doctor has been very helpful. And we brainstorm, we talk about, I mean, we geek out on things all the time. But he's not Lyme literate, right? I mean, you know, he teases me, I tease him, then we have this open dialogue. But if you're sick and you have brain fog, you're not going to be able to do that. And that's where I struggled, because if I was at that place, you know, 8 years ago, I don't know how I would have been able to handle that, because I couldn't do what I do today with those doctors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Again, this is, you know, I keep coming back to sort of the hospice part of it, or even just in general, being your own health advocate. This is one of those where it's so important for the people in your life who are close to you, and that doesn't have to be your partner. It doesn't have to be a spouse or a parent or whatever. It could be a friend who is really good. Like, I know that if and when I get sick, I have a good friend who has Crohn's disease, and she's gone for years dealing with this. I'm bringing her with me to the doctor because I can guarantee you, if I'm that ill, I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to hear what they're going to tell me. I mean, there's just too much information to try to digest. And especially if I have brain fog, if I'm just tired, or if I'm just that all over that sick, I want someone else there that can ask the questions that I would never be able to ask, and to hear and listen and take notes and those kind of things. So if you can, that's always an important thing, to be able to bring that other person with you to help. So that, you know, that's a challenging question to ask. I mean,
It is. So Sarah, let me bring you in another space. Because I don't have a lot of confidence that I could walk into a doctor's office and say, hey, please go to the ILADS page, you know, do your job. And then
I'm going to try it though, Rich. I may not succeed,
right?
but I will try.
But I think an empowered patient is more likely to get a better outcome. And I'm wondering if there are any elements of the ILADS page that you would recommend a patient to go to, so that they can prepare themselves to bring information to their practitioner, so that their practitioner can do a better job of diagnosing and treating them.
Oh, that's a great question. And quite honestly, that is an area where we need to grow. And I think that's one of the things that ILADS, this is where I get to be impatient a little bit again. I think there's so much great information that's out there that I think ILADS has not put on our website that we need to. But for starters, I mean, we do have some information on the ILADEF side, on the Education Foundation. So if you site, and there is a whole section of just basic patient care information, and it does go into ILADS and who we are and what we do and such. And we also offer complimentary webinars that are open to the public, and we're doing more of those, and we're partnering with other organizations that are doing them. I'm not big on reinventing wheels. So if there's another organization that's out there that's already doing it well, let's just partner with them, collaborate with them, and get a wider audience to view it so that, you know, more people get that knowledge. So to answer your question, the basic thing, I would just send them to the ILADF site, but also go looking through the ILAD site. There's some easy to understand basic information on there. It's not all, you know, clinical diagnosis and such. I mean, you can go down a big rabbit hole in, and we have some fantastic research, but not all the research is super complicated. I mean, if the layperson like me can understand it and read it and such, I mean, I think there's hope for everybody. But we actually are looking for, I am always looking for suggestions. So as we get in there, how can ILADS, understanding that we are this medical society, how can we help you, the public, be able to understand us better, be able to get more information that you can then take to your clinician? I mean, is it a simple downloadable PDF of what are 3 things that you should ask your medical professional? I mean, maybe that's the key. I don't have all the answers, but I am looking for them. And actually, and Ali knows this quite a bit, because I have probably peppered her with the exact same kind of questions.
I mean, I think we have to be realistic. When we have doctors who have about 15 minutes to spend with us, and they have all the anxiety associated with treating people with Lyme disease because of so many bad experiences that they've had notice of. And we use a Bureau Scannell example, but we could give hundreds of examples, thousands of examples of doctors who had to defend their licenses because they were just doing what they were trained to do, and they were doing what they swore they would do when they took the Hippocratic Oath. But it does put you in a difficult position where you're trying to treat a complex chronic illness and you only have 15 minutes, and you're in many cases going to be criticized after the fact for treating someone who is an outlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slowly changing world. I mean, I think the practitioners that are out there now are in a better position than, say, what Dr. Burskana had to deal with years ago. I know that the laws have changed, the rules have changed. Not as many people are getting called to the carpet, or if they do get called to the carpet, they have the backup and the understanding of the materials and the knowledge and the wherewithal. So some of that fear is abating slowly, not slow enough, I understand. I do think, actually, on a side note, I do think that some of the conversation around long COVID and long haulers and all that has actually kind of helped this community, for better or for worse, because I think that has brought to the conversation the same symptomology, the same challenges, the same maybe potential misdiagnosis or fear or such. And I think there's a strength that's happening in the trenches that's just sort of quietly building. So maybe there's some good that came out of that. But it's a cultural change, right? I mean, it's slowly changing, though. I'm happy to say.
My hope too is that as the mainstream conversation changes around Lyme and tick-borne disease, I do think partially, well, not thanks to long COVID, but the high level, very mainstream conversation that's happening around long COVID, hopefully we see that shift. And going back to like 5 years ago when I went into healthcare PR and mainly started servicing, Lyme and tick-borne clients at first, when I went back to work after being sick myself, it was maybe one request every couple of months that I was getting on Lyme and tick-borne disease. And now it's much, much more frequently. And I will share too about this conversation that's shifting is actually with ILADS. Some of the board members contributed to a piece on Forbes that initially started out as kind of a crash course in testing for Lyme disease with at-home kits. And it was months of back and forth with this journalist who thankfully really did her research and really took into account what the ILADS experts were saying. And it ended up turning into a piece more on the facts of testing at home and the fact that testing at home really shouldn't be done. It should be done in the doctor's office due to the complexity. And I don't know if I've seen that type of change, from a mainstream conversation before. So as a patient, it gives me a lot of hope. As a professional, it gives me a lot of hope. And I guess we'll see where it goes.
So Sarah, why don't you give us some hope? Tell us what's on the horizon for ILADS. I really love the title of your upcoming event, but tell us more about not just that event, but what else ILADS is working on and how you're going to steamroll them into moving even faster.
So I mean, the crux of ILAD's mission is education, right? So we're really focusing a lot of effort on the education of clinicians. And so I mentioned our annual scientific conference in the fall in November in San Antonio. And just as a side note, the placement of this conference in San Antonio is very specific. We were very thoughtful when we planned out where this was going to be, because as you move from Texas on westward, apparently Lyme disease doesn't exist and there are no ticks out there, and there's no other way to get sick. So I'm not sure what to tell the thousands and thousands of patients that are getting sick. So we wanted to be able to be thoughtful in bringing in more clinicians from the middle of the country on westward. And again, my hope is that we bring in more non-ILADS members. I mean, I want all the ILADS members to come, obviously, but I want more folks who are maybe ILADS curious, or maybe they have a patient that has presented, or they've been posed with a question of, do you have a patient that has all these symptoms that you can't quite figure out? Maybe we have the answer, and bring them to this conference. In addition, our signature educational offerings are the vector-borne illness fundamentals that we've been offering since 2013. And it's gone through a different metamorphosis, and it's going to go through yet another one. And this part I'm kind of excited about. So the folks who maybe have done fundamentals a couple of times, if you're in the clinical background, you understand this. We're splitting it apart now into the basics and an advanced version. And I see that basics version, which includes, like, again, identifying the different ticks and the different ways you can get, and understanding what even that spirochete is about, and the different diagnostics and the different testing, and make it more of a true basics. We might open that up to the public, to the patient and public community. Again, enabling this level of education and empowerment to happen, so that they can go to their healthcare practitioner and go, look, I took this. It was huge for me. This is a definite minimum need that you need to go through. And then turning the advanced portion of that fundamentals into much more complex inflammatory illness, and how to treat and how to handle all the co-infections. In addition, we still have our physicians training program, which is, I think, one of the cool programs where you get to shadow a preceptor for a number of hours, and you get to do this grand rounds, and you get to do all these case presentations. Again, very clinical stuff, very cool, but it's sort of one of our signature pieces. And then on the top of that, you've gone through, you're an ILADS member for years, you've gone through the different levels of education, you've gone through conferences. What's the next step? How do I take my education to the next level? And we're launching a fellowship program this year, which I'm super excited about. And I can't really, spill many beans on that, but we're hoping to be able to launch that later this year. You'll be able to see more information about that. But that's really going to be the cream of the crop of ILADS, of those practitioners, and is really going to help move that needle. That's on the clinical side. On the patient and public side, like I mentioned, we have our provider search. We have some basic information. I want to make that more robust and be able to fill in some of those gaps for the patient community. And some of that might actually be done by ILADS, and some of that might be done through some collaborative partnerships that we're working with other organizations. Because again, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there are things that are out there that are working and working well, let's just showcase that and showcase that partnership and be able to expand the awareness of those things. And some of that might be webinars, some of that might be just online learning and education. And some of that might be through, like I said, through like fundamentals courses and things like that. And I think there's a lot of places where ILADS can fit in different niches, and just expanding that healthcare continuum, I think, is really where we fit into this community. And I mean, sky's the limit on that. I think I'm hoping that we double in size in terms of members, and really be able to get, you know, twice as many publications out there, get more research out there, get more education, all the things. And I know I will have to be patient to make that all happen, but I'm not going anywhere. So we'll all make it happen.
Well, I don't want you to be patient. I want you to compress time, and I think we should do that together. So I have a suggestion, Matt. I think we should have a call to action, and I think the call to action should be that everyone who listens to this podcast should go into the phone book, if there is a phone book, or go on. I'm old, so they're on the phone books, and call 5 doctors in your community, or 5 healthcare professionals in your community. Tell them about the ILADS conference and urge them to attend the ILADS conference. What do you think, Matt?
I love that idea, but I think to make it less scary, it should be to tell our own doctors, because I think everybody listening has a team of doctors, at least one. And I think all of us should feel brave enough to trust in our relationship with our doctor, to bring it to them and tell them to go to the ILADS conference, because not only is it going to help them get better educated, but it also helps that patient making the phone call as well. Because the better informed their doctor is, the better treatment they're gonna get, Rich.
All right, I'll accept that amendment to my motion, except I want you to ask your doctor to call 4 other doctors and have them come to the ILADS conference. What about that, Matt?
I like that. I think that's a good compromise, right in the middle there.
So, Sarah, you joining us with our call to action?
Absolutely. I've already been doing it. First thing I did to my own, I see my primary care as a nurse practitioner. I asked her point blank. And of course, I whipped out a membership brochure right then and there. And she, she was honest with me, and she said, nope, I hadn't really heard of it. She knew Lyme disease. She, obviously she sees patients that deal with that. I'm like, well, then you need to join. And I keep bugging her about it, and she laughs it off. But so yes, I mean, it starts at home. And truly, it's just that first time. Once you are brave enough to ask one, it's easier after that, because then you know what to expect. You know how you're going to react to it. So I feel like the hardest part is going to be asking your healthcare practitioner first. After that, easy peasy.
Yeah, but Matt said that was going to be an easy one. You see, Matt? So I really thought it'd be a lot easier to just call 5 doctors in your community, or 5 medical professionals in your community, and just tell them they have to go, because we all know that, unfortunately, the medical education they've all received has been flawed because they didn't receive training on tick-borne illnesses. And one of the fastest ways of resolving that problem from a communal standpoint is to get them all go to San Antonio. San Antonio,
Texas.
And go to the conference where they're going to redefine Lyme disease. It's how we can resolve this problem very quickly. We can compress time by making everyone go to that. It must be mandatory for every doctor to go to that conference. Every doctor in the US.
Deal. Love it. We're ready.
So we are almost at the 2-hour mark, and you've been really lovely to speak with. But we do have a final question we have to ask you. And this is the new question we ask everybody at the end of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. It used to be, what would you do if someone you loved came into your room with a tick biting on? But we're now moving away from that, because that's going to be the subject of our soon-to-be written book. The new topic we want to develop with our community is the 3 low-cost or no-cost recommendations that you would make to somebody who's on a Lyme disease journey. And by the way, you can't recommend Tick Bootcamp, although that would be one no-cost option, but something other than listening to all of the wonderful people like Ali Moresco, who've been kind enough to share their story and their healing journey. What else would you recommend, Sarah?
So I give you the magic of Google at this point. I mean, just Google Lyme disease, ILADS, some basic words, and see what comes up. The good news is ILADS will be one of the first things that comes up. And from there,
Certainly if you Google ILADS, it will.
well, of course, if you Google ILADS, but I've done my testing on this. You type in Lyme disease and ILADS is one of the first things that comes up, which brings a joy to me because that's the first thing that I'm going to click on and you know, go down that rabbit hole.
Okay, so number one is begin your educational journey by coming in contact with ILADS and the educational materials. Okay,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
number two.
Talk to people, talk to friends, talk to anybody that will listen, like, hey, I don't feel right. Something's not right. And I can almost guarantee you, just I think you started this when we started this talk, everybody has somebody in their life who's been affected by Lyme disease. And it always comes out. I love that. It always comes out in the, well, like, do you think you have Lyme disease? Or I think I got bit by a tick. Oh, well, let me tell you about my cousin. Da, da, da. Talk about it. Don't be shy. Please say it out loud, repeat it, talk about it in family gatherings. I've become that person that, like, when you sit at the Thanksgiving table, like, oh, good God, Sarah's going to talk about Lyme disease again. Here we go. Don't be afraid. Bring it up. So that's number two.
Okay, and number three?
And then number three gets a little more challenging because I think this is where you turn inward, right? This is where I really want to become introspective. And, you know, we were talking about being your own healthcare advocate and understanding, you know, you've got to speak up for yourself. You don't be shy. It's understanding where you are. And I get not everybody can be as aggressive as I am or as outspoken and bombastic. And I get that. But look inside yourself to be able to see, okay, well, how would I approach that? I can't talk to anybody. I can't say that out loud. Oh my God. And really dive into what would I be comfortable dealing with? Would I be comfortable being sick and just taking it? No. And start going through that internal process. And that's not easy. We all have kind of gone through that in one sense or another. But be able to really understand internally what will I accept of myself? And then from there, that leads you back to some of the other things that we've been talking about the last couple of hours of, yeah.
So number three is to prepare yourself to be courageous and go forward with taking action, even though you don't necessarily know what the outcome or what the process is going to be, but that's a necessary element of going through this journey of healing from Lyme disease.
Absolutely. And that is probably the scariest of all.
I love it. Great. Three great suggestions. So Sarah, thank you very much for all the great work you're doing for ILADS. Thank you for taking time away from your family to speak with me and Matt. And thank you for bringing one of the joys of our community, Ali Moresco, to join us today.
Thank you for providing this platform to so many people to be able to give voice to the patient community and to ILADS clinicians and anybody out there in this community to help spread that word and help get the conversation going louder.